Of all the U.S. fighters during World War II, only one remained in production throughout the entire conflict: Lockheed's P-38, the Lightning. Thanks to its firepower, speed, and the reliability of its twin engines, this versatile and advanced design became one of America's most durable and valuable assets.
It was the best damn airplane ever built. As far as I am concerned, it was like flying a Cadillac automobile.
It was just an aviator's dream to fly in a P-38. It made the war in the Pacific.
We had very few planes that could keep up with the speed of the German planes or even the Japanese planes, so they needed something that would be able to be competitive.
In 1933, the newly restructured Lockheed Aircraft Company gambled its future on developing an advanced twin-engine aircraft it hoped would remain at the forefront of aviation for the next decade. To test the design, a scale model was built at the then staggering cost of $5,000 and sent to the University of Michigan for wind tunnel testing. During this process, Lockheed's executives met a young engineer named Kelly Johnson. His innovative aircraft design ideas so impressed the company that he was quickly hired. This marked the start of a brilliant partnership, helping Lockheed become one of the world's leading aviation companies. In 1933, the new project involved significant risks during uncertain times. Perhaps Lockheed's greatest advantage against failure lay in the human resource of its talented staff. Although the company was becoming increasingly automated, this was still an era when technicians saw themselves as craftsmen, and Lockheed's production teams embodied an old-school dedication with immense pride in their work. They also understood that the company's future depended on the success of the new multi-purpose twin-engine aircraft. For the model to succeed, it wasn't just a commercial airliner that was needed, but various types of military aircraft as well. From this basic model, several variants, including the well-known Hudson bomber, went into mass production. In some ways, global politics worked in Lockheed's favor. The rise of the Axis powers, especially Germany's rearmament, highlighted an emerging threat to world peace and underscored the need for expanding American air power. Soon, the U.S. Defense Department identified the need for a high-speed anti-bomber aircraft, but they set the specifications so high that few in the industry believed they could be met. Lockheed assigned the project to Kelly Johnson, who believed the required maximum speed of 360 miles per hour was attainable, but only by using an aircraft with the power of 2 engines. In fact, Johnson's design surpassed expectations, capable of reaching over 400 miles per hour. Normally, a twin-engine configuration would result in poor maneuverability, but Johnson countered this with a brilliant twin-boom design. This innovation secured a Defense Department contract in June 1937 to produce a single aircraft, the Model 22, at a fixed price of $163,000. Once again, Lockheed was taking a major risk. The prototype would end up costing 5 times that amount. However, this extra investment proved to be one of the company's best decisions. The Model 22 was officially designated as the P-38 fighter. With Europe on the brink of war, production of the aircraft remained highly secret. By January 1939, after minor modifications to the braking system, the new aircraft was ready for its first flight. On January 27, the first XP-38, precursor to nearly 10,000 fighters, took flight for the first time. Securing government funding for armaments was still politically sensitive, and the Army Air Force recognized the need for public support for the P-38. To garner this, they unveiled the project by announcing an attempt to break the Trans-America airspeed record. On February 11, 1939, the only P-38 in existence, with just 6 hours of flight time, embarked on its record-setting flight. Lieutenant Ben Kelsey was at the controls, with the American public and taxpayers watching closely. To cover the journey, Kelsey refueled at Amarillo and Brightfield before reaching Mitchell Field. These stops added about an hour to the total flight time, but the aircraft still completed the 2,490-mile trip in just 7 hours and 43 minutes, only slightly longer than Howard Hughes' previous record, which had been set in a specially designed plane carrying enough fuel for the entire trip. Unfortunately, during Kelsey's final approach to Mitchell Field, the aircraft struck a line of trees, crashed, and was destroyed. However, the plane's impressive speed convinced the Defense Department to immediately award Lockheed a contract for 13 YP-38s. The aircraft were to be equipped with a 37mm cannon and 4 machine guns, 2 30mm and 2 50mm, making it one of the most heavily armed fighters of its time. Within months, even more firepower was added, while interior design changes nearly doubled its ammunition capacity. Lockheed was now firmly in the fighter business, and the Burbank plant was restructured for mass production, resulting in approximately 30,000 minor design changes. Additional modifications were also required to reduce the buffeting and address a phenomenon known as compressibility, which caused the aircraft to vibrate during certain maneuvers, particularly when diving. The true solution to the compressibility issue wouldn't be discovered for several years, but these minor setbacks didn't slow the progress of what was considered the world's best interceptor. In September 1939, as Germany invaded Poland and plunged Europe into World War II, the Army Air Force ordered an additional 66 P-38s on the same day the first YP-38 made its maiden flight. From the outset, protecting the pilot with armor was a top priority. Throughout its service, the P-38 underwent constant testing to enhance its resilience against enemy fire, with pilot safety being paramount. The plexiglass canopy and armor plating around the pilot were rigorously tested with gunfire. In June 1940, the British ordered 600 of these impressive aircraft, naming them the Lightning. However, due to the secrecy surrounding the vital superchargers, they were only provided with a less powerful engine and aircraft equipped with propellers that rotated in the same direction. This hybrid version proved underpowered and difficult to handle, and the British accepted only 3 before dubbing them castrated Lightnings and canceling the order.
The British didn't like the airplane. And they had been in conflict for quite a while, and they knew airplanes, and they didn't want that thing. And it was a real dog. It didn't have some turbo. It didn't fly high. All the props turned in the same direction.
However, the name Lightning remained with the aircraft throughout its career. The American model retained the key features, including counter-rotating propellers that provided stability to the twin engines. Behind the engine was the critical General Electric supercharger, which transformed average engines into powerful units. By late 1940, Lightnings were rolling off the production line. These aircraft were exceptionally powerful, boasting a high rate of climb, long range, and the safety of twin engines, making them popular with pilots. Unfortunately, the compressibility issue continued to limit high-speed performance.
The P-38 was having a problem, credibility problem. Pilots are aspiring pilots and heard some things that weren't very complimentary about the P-38. Now, as young cadets, 20, 21 years old, we really didn't know what compressibility was at the time, but that was one of the rumors, that the P-38 was a dangerous airplane if it hit compressibility.
In the early 1940s, pilot training began in two-seater, single-engine biplanes, which were much lower in power. The trainee pilot always had an instructor present, but when a young pilot first sat in the cockpit of a twin-engine Lightning, he was entirely on his own. This created significant challenges given the plane's immense power. To address this, an awkward attempt was made to add a second seat in the port boom cockpit. More effective, however, was the piggyback concept. The radio was removed from behind the pilot's seat, allowing the instructor or trainee to crouch there, ensuring that the first-time pilot didn't have to manage the Lightning's intimidating power alone. The Lightning also introduced several unique features, such as a spoked steering wheel in place of the traditional joystick and dual-engine related controls for turning. The tricycle undercarriage was another innovation that pilots favored, as it made takeoffs and landings much easier than the standard tailwheel design. Landings were particularly safer, as the Lightning could land at higher speeds without risking a stall. During training, pilots were taught to always wind up the side windows, as failing to do so would disrupt the airflow during takeoff, causing severe buffeting from the resulting turbulence. New crews often worried about the dangers of bailing out of the twin-boom P-38, fearing the rear elevator slab might act like a blade and strike them as they exited the aircraft. However, as this training film emphasizes, those concerns were unfounded.
Bailouts can be made either, 1, by turning the plane on its back and dropping out, or 2, by getting out the left window and sliding down the wing. Now, don't stand on the wing to jump.
The quality of the training was soon put to the test. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, America entered the war, and peacetime pilots transitioned into combat roles. Due to its long range, the P-38 could be flown in stages across the Atlantic to Britain. A squadron was stationed in Iceland to protect the staging airfield and patrol sea routes, attempting to intercept German long-range reconnaissance planes that were attacking ships and guiding U-boats. Without radar, these efforts were typically unsuccessful. However, on August 15, 1942, a patrolling P-38 spotted a Focke-Wulf Condor, and Lieutenant Shanahan shot down the German plane within seconds, marking the Army Air Force's first victory against the Luftwaffe. Focke-Wulf also produced the stub-nosed FW-190, which is often regarded as the best dogfighter of the entire Second World War in Europe. Alongside the Messerschmitt 109s, these aircraft had a devastating impact on early 8th Air Force daylight bombing campaigns against Germany. Without fighter protection, the early B-17s were shot down in alarming numbers, and at one point, the entire strategic bombing campaign was at risk. It became clear that to continue long-range daylight bombing, long-range escorts would be necessary. The Lightning emerged as the obvious choice, and American fighter crews were eager to showcase the P-38's potential. However, those stationed in Britain were initially sent to support the more urgent North African campaign, delaying the development of the bomber escort program. Typically flying along P-47 Thunderbolts, Lightning pilots would receive briefings on fighter protection and coordinate with the 8th Air Force heavy bombers. Finally, Lightnings were set to engage the Luftwaffe on equal terms. The results of these early encounters were mixed. While the P-38 had impressive diving capabilities at high speeds, it was not as agile as the FW-190s at high-altitude engagements. Instead, the Lightning proved more effective at lower altitudes, where it could dive on German fighters as they climbed to attack B-17 bomber formations. A high-speed dive attack was effective for only one approach, but with the Lightning's heavy firepower, an accurate pilot could make it the best way to engage German fighters. In the skies over Europe, the Lightning earned the German nickname Fork-tailed Devil. The 8th Air Force's fighter escort operations were largely successful, resulting in significantly fewer B-17s being lost to enemy fighters. Additionally, it became standard practice for American fighters returning from escort missions to strafe enemy ground targets. In this role, the P-38 became legendary. Its long range and formidable armament made it a deadly ground attack aircraft. German airfields were prime targets, and American fighters employed the same tactics used by Germany against England during the Battle of Britain, attacking German aircraft where they were most vulnerable, on the ground. The combat experiences led to enhancements in later models of the P-38. This is a light G model, which featured an enlarged chin intake under each engine. Improvements were also made to the aircraft's armament, with the cannon and machine gun combinations often being varied to increase firepower. Additionally, the wing tank hardpoints were now being utilized to carry 500-pound bombs, proving that this aircraft, originally designed as an anti-bomber interceptor, could also effectively serve in ground attack roles. Flying low off the Californian coast, this late model P-38 tested a new weapons combination. The issue of compressibility, identified as the buildup of shock waves over the airframe at high speeds, was finally addressed. Special flaps fitted under the main spar were tested and eventually installed on all late J models and widely used L model. These flaps provided a nose-up attitude during dives, keeping the aircraft stable and manageable in various flight positions. With these improvements, Lockheed's powerful Lightning became a nearly perfect fighting plane. These L models, based in Italy, showcase the aircraft's capabilities. Like all Lightnings, their performance relied heavily on the General Electric supercharger. When an aircraft was scrapped for any reason, maintenance crews would salvage reusable parts, placing particular emphasis on the crucial supercharger. Even in a state of decay, this P-38 held value for the Allied war effort. Maintaining twin-engine aircraft was, understandably, more time-consuming than caring for their single-engine counterparts. The ground crew's dedication was as crucial to the success of operations as that of any pilot. This squadron was being prepared for a ground attack mission. The decision to carry either drop tanks or bombs depended on the specific requirements of the mission. In this case, long-range capability was necessary. For ground attack missions, 2 500-pound bombs would be more suitable. In reality, P-38s were capable of carrying much heavier bomb loads, and the F model could even deliver 2 torpedoes. However, it was the versatile 500-pound bomb that saw the most frequent use. Immediately following their briefing, crews would depart to fly their missions, embodying a mix of determination and camaraderie. Each man hoped that the mission would be no more than a routine hulling job, but they were all aware that it could be anything but that. Throughout World War II, pilots recorded their victories on the sides of their aircraft, serving as both a morale booster and an accolade. This practice, which originated during World War I, was common among the air forces of all combatant nations. Some pilots placed all their trust in their aircraft, while others relied on sentimental objects for luck. All personal effects that could fall into enemy hands had to be surrendered before takeoff, and until they returned, the mission was paramount. This remarkable footage, captured from a camera suspended beneath the wing of a P-38, provides a glimpse of what Army Air Force pilots experienced during a routine interdiction mission. Back at Burbank, the final stages of P-38 production were often carried out outdoors, taking advantage of the clear Californian weather. However, the main plant was anything but exposed. The Lockheed factory, like other production facilities on the West Coast, was considered a prime target for Japanese suicide attacks. Given the critical role of the Lightning in the war effort, the Defense Department went to extraordinary lengths to camouflage this essential facility. The main Burbank factory underwent an impressive transformation, with the entire roof designed to resemble a paddock with rolling hills and even fake farmhouses to mislead Japanese aerial attackers. The reconnaissance version of the P-38 had no armament whatsoever, as it was equipped with large cameras mounted in the nose and relied on its speed for protection as well as on its paintwork. Early in the war, the Army was approached by Mr. Samuel Cabot, who offered a paint that would make aircraft invisible at altitude. Initially, the idea was dismissed, but later, in collaboration with the Sherwin-Williams Paint Company, a product was developed that made the P-38 almost invisible when viewed from the ground. The haze blue camouflage proved to be a remarkable success, yet its usage has seldom been highlighted. However, pilots who flew reconnaissance Lightnings were well aware of its effectiveness. In this footage, one of the haze blue reconnaissance planes flies alongside the standard olive drab of the fighter. The P-38's role in photo reconnaissance, particularly in the Pacific, was arguably its most vital function. As soon as a plane landed, the camera pack would be unloaded and the film processed immediately, allowing tacticians to assess the situation without delay. Many of the war's most crucial decisions relied entirely on these photographs. Given the value of the intelligence gathered, the Reconnaissance Lightnings likely saved more lives than any other piece of hardware in the conflict. An unusually colored P-38 named Yippee was the 5,000th aircraft off the production line. To celebrate this milestone, it was painted in a bright vermilion, with its personalized name emblazoned on the nose and across the underside of the wings. Despite the striking exterior, if you look closely, you can see that the interior still retained the conventional drab olive color. When Lockheed first submitted its proposal to the Defense Department, it never anticipated producing 5,000 Lightnings. However, by the end of the war, the total figure would nearly double that number. Another chapter in the story of this versatile aircraft was the Pathfinder program. In early tests, the armament was removed to make space for a second crew member, equipped with instruments to act as a bomb aimer, guiding other aircraft to their targets. This was only a developmental example where the concept was initially explored, using sandbags to mimic the weight of the second crew member. The program continued, and P-38s with specially enlarged forward fuselages, known as droop snoots, eventually entered production, providing excellent service as Pathfinders. On the business end of the Lightning, the armament typically consisted of a combination of machine guns and cannons. The aircraft's immense firepower, combined with its ability to avoid shooting through propellers, gave it a significant hitting advantage over Axis competitors. At a Pacific base, a crashed C-46 serves as an improvised control room for the Twin Dragon Squadron. Here, a pilot inspects repairs to damage sustained from enemy gunfire before heading out once more on a ground attack mission. Not all targets in the Pacific were static. Japanese fighters could be both prey and predator. While the Zero was incredibly nimble, other Japanese aircraft were less capable. Captain H. Seeley, nicknamed Light Horse Harry, was a P-38 ace with 10 confirmed kills and 1 probable. However, the all-time Lightning ace with an impressive 40 kills was Richard Bong. Bong flew all of his combat missions in P-38s, and even the legendary agility of the Zero was no match for his almost uncanny ability to down enemy aircraft. Bong was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor after his 25th combat success and returned to the USA in early January 1945. He went on extended leave and married his longtime fiancée before reporting to Lockheed in early June for duty as a test pilot, where he would fly the new jet-powered P-80. Tragically, with very little experience on the aircraft, he was killed in a P-80 that flamed out on takeoff. The date was August 7, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The last of the Lightnings, the P-38M, was in many ways the most intriguing, a jet-black, radar-equipped night fighter. 75 were produced as modifications of P-38Ls. These aircraft prowled the night skies over the Pacific theater, seeking out Japanese targets and protecting U.S. airstrips. Though they came late in the war and did not see much active service, when they did, they demonstrated the concept's viability, leading many enemy pilots to regret their effectiveness. To accommodate the radar operator, the piggyback concept was pushed to the limit, with a blister canopy added to provide a cramped space above and behind the pilot, where the operator would huddle, peering into a tiny screen. The guns featured special blast shields on the muzzles to prevent the flash from interfering with the pilot's night vision and effectively blinding him, while the radar was mounted under the nose in an external module. On the day Japan surrendered, over 2,000 more P-38s were on order, but only those that were under construction at the war's end were completed, as the remaining orders were cancelled. In total, 9,923 P-38s were produced, but as production ceased, Lockheed's Burbank plant was already churning out the P-80, America's first production jet fighter, the very plane Major Bong had been testing, but he was tragically killed. Within a few short years, the P-38 was being phased out of use. However, for those who built, serviced, and flew the Lightning, it will always remain one of history's truly great airplanes.
The Northrop P-61 Black Widow is a twin-engine United States Army Air Force fighter aircraft of World War II. It was the first operational U.S. warplane designed as a night fighter, and the first aircraft designed specifically as a night fighter. Created by Northrop Aviation in collaboration with the British Royal Air Force, the P-61 was also the first aircraft designed to use radar. With its mysterious appearance and name, the Black Widow ruled the night in the waning months of World War II. When World War II began, The US Army Corps and the British Royal Air Force flew mostly outdated aircraft compared to the war-ready counterparts on the Axis side. In August 1940, 16 months before the United States entered the war, the U.S. air officer in London, Lieutenant General Delos C. Emmons, was briefed on British research and radar, which had been underway since 1935 and had played an important role in the nation's defense against the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Britain. General Emanos was informed of the new Airborne Intercept Radar, AI for short, a self-contained unit that could be installed in aircraft and operated independently of ground stations. In September 1940, the Tazard mission traded British research, including the cavity magnetron, that would make self-contained interception radar installations practicable for American production. Simultaneously, the British Purchasing Commission, evaluating U.S. aircraft, declared their urgent need for a high-altitude, high-speed aircraft to intercept the Luftwaffe bombers attacking London at night. Night fighters would soon become their own category of aircraft. A night fighter was a fighter concept. Still, it wasn't until after the catastrophic bombing raids over Europe, particularly the London Blitz in 1940, that the military air force has really found a need for a plane catering specifically to these types of missions. The Northrop Aircraft Corporation, located in California, had only been in active operation since 1939, mainly as a subcontractor for larger aircraft manufacturers. It was definitely an unlikely candidate to develop the world's first night fighter. More prominent corporations such as Lockheed, Grumman, and Douglas were already committed beyond their capacity, stocking America's existing aircraft fleet. Northrop availability gave it a window of opportunity. On the 5th of November, Northrop and Pavleka met at Wright Field with Air Materiel Command officers and presented them with Northrop's preliminary design. The Douglas XA-26A night fighter proposal was the only competition. Northrop's design was selected. Following the USAAC acceptance, Northrop began a comprehensive design work on what would become the first dedicated night fighter. The result was the largest Pursuit-class aircraft flown by the US during the war. The aircraft was huge, as Northrop had anticipated. While far larger and heavier multi-engine bombers existed, its 45.5 feet or 14-meter length, 66-foot or 20-meter wingspan, and projected 22,600 pounds or 10,251 kilo full load weight were unheard for a fighter, making the P-61 hard for many to accept as a feasible fighter aircraft. Some alternate design features were investigated before finalization. Late in November 1940, Jack Northrop returned to the crew of 3 and twin-tail rudder assembly. To meet the USAAC's request for more firepower, designers abandoned the ventral turret and mounted 4 20mm Hispano M2 cannons in the wings. As the design evolved, the cannons were repositioned in the belly of the aircraft. The P-61 therefore became one of the few US-designed fighter aircraft to have a quartet of 20mm cannon, along with the NA-91 version of the Mustang, and the US Navy's operated F-4U-1C Corsair, as factory standard in World War II. Following a few small changes, Northrop's NS-8A fulfilled the USAAC's requirements, and the Air Corps issued Northrop a letter of authority for purchase on December 17th. A contract for 2 prototypes and 2 scale models to be used for wind tunnel testing was awarded on the 10th of January 1941. Northrop's Specification 8A became, by designation of the War Department, the XP-61. Northrop's engineers built a full-scale wooden mock-up of the XP-61. So, on March 10th, another contract was approved by the Undersecretary of War. This ensured the production of 13 YP-61s, and the groundwork was laid for the production of the airframes that would become the famous P-61 Black Widows. It was also a rather large aircraft for a fighter, at 50 feet long and a wingspan of 66 feet. The P-61 was a twin-boom design with a crew consisting of a pilot, gunner, and the new member, a radar operator. He would operate the compact airborne interceptor specifically designed to fit inside an aircraft, leaving out the middleman who had previously relied on instructions from radar-operated out-of-ground stations. The production model of the SCR-720A mounted a scanning radio transmitter in the aircraft nose. In airborne intercept mode, it had a range of nearly 5 miles, or 8 kilometers. The unit also functioned as an airborne beacon or homing device, navigational aid, or in concert with interrogator responder units. The XP-61's radar operator located targets on his scope and steered the unit to track them, vectoring and steering the pilot to the radar target via oral instruction and correction. Once within range, the pilot used a smaller scope integrated into the main instrument panel to track and close on the target. This rotating 30-inch scanner receiver dish antenna would sweep the sky with a knife-like beam. When used, it reduced the ground echoes that plagued long-wave radars at low altitude. This shorter wavelength enhanced accuracy, betting interceptors within just 100 yards of intruders in total darkness. His radical shift was the main reason that the Black Widow could fly at night, as the device allowed pilots to navigate and locate airborne enemies in real time. Red-colored cockpit lighting was another innovation that further aided the vision and night fighting. The Black Widow's lethal bite could rival any that the enemy had to offer. It was armed with 4 20mm Hispano M2 forward-firing cannons mounted in the lower fuselage, and 4 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns lined up horizontally with the 2 middle guns slightly offset upwards in a remotely aimed dorsally mounted turret. A similar arrangement to that used in the B-29 Superfortress, using 4-gun upper forward remote turrets. The XP-61's spine-mounted dorsal remote turret, driven by the General Electric gyroscopic fire control computer, could be aimed and fired by the gunner or radar operator, who both had aiming control and gyroscopic collimator sighting posts attached to their swiveling seats, or could be locked forward to be fired by the pilot in addition to the 20mm cannon. The radar operator could rotate the turret to engage targets behind the aircraft. Capable of a full 360 rotation and 90-degree elevation, the turret could be used to engage any target in the hemisphere, above and to the sides of the XP-61. The unique system was to often have difficulty achieving an accurate aim. The P-61 was powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engines, each packing 2,000 horsepower. The 2 engines were each mounted approximately 1/6 out on the wingspan. It was capable of a maximum speed of 366 miles an hour, which was relatively fast considering its immense size. The P-61 also had an internal fuel capacity of 646 gallons. Its estimated fighting weight was over 29,000 pounds. Main landing gear bays were located at the bottom of each nacelle, directly behind the engine. Each engine cowling and nacelle drew back into tail booms that terminated upward in large vertical stabilizers, and their component rudders, each of a similar shape to a rounded right triangle. The horizontal stabilizer extended between the inner surfaces of the 2 vertical stabilizers and was approximately 3/4 the chord of the wing root, including the elevator. The elevator spanned approximately 1/3 of the horizontal stabilizer's width, and, in overhead plan view, angled inwards in the horizontal from both corners of the leading edge towards the triangle edge approximately 15 degrees, forming the elevator into a wide, short trapezoid. Leading edge updraft carburetor intakes were present on the wing shoulder and the root of the outer wing, with a few inches of separation from the engine nacelle itself. Thin horizontal rectangles, with the ends rounded out to nearly a half circle, with multiple vertical vanes inside of it to direct the airstream properly. The main fuselage was centered on the aircraft's centerline. It was, from the tip of the nose to the end of the plexiglass tail cone, approximately 5/6 the length of one wing. The nose housed an evolved form of the Signal Corps' radar SCR-268, the Western Electric Company's SCR-720A. Immediately behind the radar was the multi-framed greenhouse canopy, featuring 2 distinct levels, one for the pilot and a second for the gunner above him and behind him, the latter elevated by approximately 6 inches or 150 millimeters. The forward canopy in the XP-61 featured contiguous, smooth-curved, blown plexiglass canopy sections facing forward, in front of the pilot and the gunner. Beneath the forward crew compartment was the nose gear wheel well, through which the pilot and gunner entered and exited the aircraft. The radar's operator station was at the aft end of the gondola. The radar operator controlled the radar set and viewed its display scopes from the isolated rear compartment, which he entered by the way of a small hatch with a built-in ladder on the underside of the aircraft. The overall design was exceptionally clean and fluid, as the aircraft possessed very few sharp corners or edges. Another stealthy innovation was the new glossy black paint in the metal armor instead of the usual olive green and gray paint. Like flight tests in Florida in October 1943 pitted both schemes against each other, the black color was not detached in 80% of flights throughout the gauntlet of anti-aircraft searchlights. Starting in February 1944, all Black Widows were painted deep black, allowing the P-61 to truly fit its name. It took Northrop engineers over a year and a half to fix developmental delays and revisions. All the while, the Army Air Forces were desperate to start training night pilots. They have no problem getting the crews of volunteers to the training. Redesigns during the production phase cost Northrop 2 critical wartime years. Although its late rollout and obsolescence will ultimately be its demise. The Black Widow delay is turned into a platform for innovation. The P-61's official public debut was quite dramatic. In January 1944, AA-61 performed a nighttime flyover of the Los Angeles Coliseum, filled with 75,000 attendees as part of a new Army-Navy show. According to some accounts, the crowd couldn't see the plane and could only hear its engines passing over. The first squadron to fly the Black Widow in Europe was the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron on May 23, 1944. Almost a month later, the 425th Squadron received their Black Widows. However, both of them received the aircraft too late to participate in the D-Day invasion on June 6th. The first P-61 engagement in European theater occurred on the 15th of July, when a P-61 piloted by Lieutenant Hermann Ernst was directed to intercept a V-1 flying bomb. Diving from above and behind to match the V-1's 350-mile-an-hour speed, the P-61's plastic rear cone imploded under pressure and the attack was aborted. The tail cones failed on several P-61A models before this problem was corrected. On the 16th of July, Lieutenant Ernst was again directed to attack a V-1, and, this time, was successful, giving the 422nd NFS and the European theater its first P-61 kill. The absence of turrets and gunners in most European theater P-61s presented several unique challenges. The 422nd NFS kept its radar operator in the rear compartment, meaning the pilot had no visual contact with the operator. As a result, several pilots continued flying their critically damaged P-61s under the mistaken belief that the radar operator was injured and unconscious, when he had already bailed out. The 425th NFS moved the radar operator to the gunner's position behind the pilot. This provided an extra set of eyes up front and moved the aircraft's center of gravity about 15 inches or 380 millimeters forward, changing the flight characteristics from slightly nose up to slightly nose down, which improved the P-61's overall performance. By December 1944, P-61s of the 422nd and 425th NFS were helping to repel the German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge, with 2 flying cover of the town of Bastogne. Pilots of the 422nd and 425th NFS switched their tactics from night flighting to daylight ground attack, strafing German supply lines and railroads. The P-61's 420mm cannon proved effective in destroying German locomotives and trucks. During this battle, the P-61 obsolescence became apparent. Lieutenant van Nieuwswande was piloting his Daisy May Black Widow when an encounter with the twin-engine Messerschmitt 410 led to a pursuit across the top of the woods. This wonder attempted to attack and follow its enemy by chasing it at full throttle, but by the time the Black Widow caught up, the ME-410 pulled away at 400 miles an hour, making the P-61 seem painfully slow in comparison. The 422nd and 425th Squadrons also found themselves critically short of spare parts by the end of 1944. Being a smaller company, Northrop couldn't keep up with the demand and supply issue was never corrected. The squadron had made do with whatever equipment they had on hand. Most operational 61s ended up being sent to the Pacific. After Guadalcanal was secured in late 1942, The American stronghold urgently needed nighttime protection from Japanese nighttime raids launched out of bases in the surrounding areas. The Black Widows weren't ready yet, so the Americans temporarily adapted B-25s, P-40s, P-38s, and P-70s as night fighters. Finally, in May 1944, the Black Widows were ready to fly in the Pacific. The first to receive a P-61 was the 6th Night Fighter Squadron. They were the only night fighting squadron until the 418th and 419th Squadrons also began working with Black Widows. On July 1st, 1944, the 421st Squadron was also activated, and, operating from bases at Nadzab, New Guinea, and Wake Island, actual fighting by the P-61 was sparse. The 418th Squadron, based on the island of Morotai in the Hull, Maharas, and the Duchious Indies operate at the top, scoring Black Widow. Highlighting the P-61 light action and combat, the 418th conducted a mere 18 successful attacks. Its most triumphant mission came when the 3 Kawasaki Ki-61s were destroyed in a single night. Despite its innovative design, the P-61 was only able to play a minor role during the last 6 months of World War II. The Axis powers were already too weak to put up much of a fight on the ground, let alone in the air. The Lady in the Dark 61, piloted by Captain Lee Kendall, is perhaps the best-known Black Widow in the world. The fighter was photographed hundreds of times in the Pacific Theater. It was also the aircraft that presumably scored all the final 2 aerial kills of World War II. The first kill happened on the night of the war, and the second one almost an entire day after all battles had officially ended. Captain Kendall took down Japanese Imperial Army aircraft in kamikaze missions by aggressively pursuing them and causing them to crash on their own. The P-61 proved capable against all Japanese aircraft it encountered, but saw too few of them to make any significant difference in the Pacific War effort. Simply put, the 61 arrived too late to World War II. Although it was useful in battles against the Japanese Air Force, it was already obsolete in Europe by the time it got there. Northrop engineers tried to fix as many issues forced by the P-61 as possible. He redesigned the airborne intercept radar and improved the remote control turret. Turbochargers were also added to the aircraft, but it still lagged in speed. Despite his late arrival, Black Widow still saw combat in every theater of World War II. The fighter destroyed a total of 127 enemy aircraft and 18 German V-1 buzz bombs. The useful life of the Black Widow was extended for a few years into the immediate post-war period due to the USAAF's problems in developing a useful jet-powered night/all-weather fighter. Shortly after the war, a Black Widow was used in early American ejection seat experiments. The P-61 was heavily involved in the Thunderstorm project from 1946 to 1949, a landmark effort to gather data on thunderstorm activity. The project was a joint effort by 4 U.S. government agencies, the U.S. Weather Bureau and the NACA, assisted by the U.S. Army Air Forces and Navy. Scientists from several universities also helped the launch, design, and conduct of the project, which aimed to learn more about thunderstorms and how to better protect civil and military airplanes from them. The P-61's radar and particular flight characteristics enabled it to find and penetrate the most turbulent regions of a storm, and returned crew and instruments intact for detailed study. Surviving aircraft were offered to civilian governmental agencies, or declared surplus and offered for sale on the commercial market. 5 were eventually issued civil registrations. The P-61 was, in fact, a remarkable response to the mission set for it, but that mission had already changed before it got into combat. Northrop, a small manufacturer that rose to meet the challenge, did an amazing job of building a sophisticated, new technology airplane that had no precedent. They didn't adapt an earlier design to become a night fighter or base the P-61 on anything that already existed. They started with a clean sheet of paper and invented the first all-weather day-night interceptor. In that sense, it was the beginning of today's anytime, anywhere 24-hour US Air Force. It was the start of something else big, too. Oddball specialty airframer Northrop aircraft, once small enough that it could be given the night fighter assignment without disturbing the work of such long-gone industry giants as Republic and North American, is today the Northrop Grumman Corporation, the 5th largest defense contractor in the world.
How can we raise up a giant? How do we give birth to a jungle warrior? How do we craft an airplane to take us around the world? Designers seeking to answer this strange mix of questions all came up with the same answer: twin booms. From the legendary Lockheed Lightning, to the de Havilland Vampire, to the Fairchild pack plane, designers have turned to twin booms to meet some of the toughest challenges. Though their quirky looks raised some eyebrows, more often than not, the boomers of aviation proved to be works of genius. Even without its twin-tail booms, the Kalinin K-7 is arguably one of the oddest-looking aircraft ever constructed. Designed by Soviet World War I pilot Konstantin Kalinin, it was quite Frankenstein in appearance, with 7 engines bolted onto the wings and with 2 massive underwing pods. The pods housed the landing gear and were armed with machine gun turrets. It was a bold piece of engineering. The K-7's gigantic wings spread almost as far as B-52s, and it could carry 128 passengers, 150 fully armed paratroopers, or 21,000 pounds of bombs. Unfortunately for the Soviets, their pride in homemade products may have been their downfall. Kalinin had planned to use BMW engines, but a switch was made to Soviet AM-34 engines. They were badly underpowered, and a 7th pusher engine was added between the tail booms as a booster. The K-7's diminutive twin tail may have been chosen as a way of keeping total weight down. However, the twin booms turned out to be the K-7's Achilles heel. On its final flight, the tail boom began to shudder and fell to pieces. The flying giant went into a deadly dive. 14 passengers and 1 bystander on the ground were killed. It was a PR nightmare for the Soviets, who had bragged about the creation of a totally Soviet-made monster aircraft. The twin boom design also helped to get a flying shoe into the air. The BV-138 was a twin boom amphibian aircraft built by German manufacturer Blohm & Voss. Seaplanes have to deal with a problem known as sticking, or the tendency of the hull to stick to the water during takeoff. Certainly, the BV-138's trimotors and rocket pods would have partially alleviated this issue. However, the designers at Blohm & Voss went one step further. They decided to give their seaplane a high twin-boom tail. The tail sat well above the waterline, meaning there was less hull surface area to stick to the water during takeoff. The shoe-like appearance of the clipped tailless fuselage earned this aircraft the nickname of Der Fliegende Holzschutt, or the Flying Clog. At first, the shoe was a good fit for Germany. At the start of World War II, it was the main maritime patrol and naval reconnaissance aircraft of the Luftwaffe. Later versions were equipped with a dural hoop for minesweeping. Perhaps the most notable achievement of the BV-138 was that it was also able to outduel another legendary seaplane in a dogfight, the consolidated Catalina. Though the shoe was an old favorite in the Luftwaffe, it soon became unfashionable. With the arrival of Allied carriers and more advanced fighters, the other shoe dropped, and the BV-138 was outmatched and obsolete. Twin booms could also provide an aircraft with a $1 million view. The Abrams P-1 Explorer was designed by Talbot Adams specifically for aerial photography and mapping. The P-1's twin booms allowed Talbot to place the engine at the rear of the fuselage. This kept the camera free from oil and also improved forward visibility. The cockpit was pushed well ahead of the wings and was walled with framed plexiglass, giving the pilot and crew an unobstructed view of all ahead and below. Talbot continued to tinker with the design in the hopes that the plane might snare a buyer and become mass-produced. But when war arrived, all those plans were put on hold. In World War II, reconnaissance aircraft were just as vital to operations as bombers and fighters. They could gather tactical recon about the movements and defenses of enemy forces, assess bomb damage, and help pinpoint the positions of enemy targets in the battlefield. In 1937, Germany was looking for a 3-seat recon aircraft to help support ground operations. Arado offered up the AR-198, a conventional aircraft with windows in all directions to ensure good visibility. From Blom and Voss came Dr. Richard Vought's daring asymmetrical plane, the BV-141. Legendary Focke-Wulf designer Kurt Tank gambled on a twin-boom design when he conceived the FW-189. Like the Abrams Explorer, the aircraft's twin booms provided for a clearer view of operations below. A central crew gondola, walled with windows, and virtually sitting on top of the wings, offered an excellent view in all directions. Tank jeopardized the proposal by insisting on 2 engines rather than 1, but in the end, the FW-189 won the competition, and officially became Germany's eye in the sky. In all, 864 aircraft were produced in factories in Czechoslovakia and occupied France. The aircraft was particularly effective on the Russian front, where it gained the nickname the Rama, or frame, for the rectangular shape formed by the wing, tailplane, and booms. Russian fighters more often than not found themselves firing through the frame and hitting nothing but air. The FW-189, though not the quickest of aircraft, could outturn Russian fighters and blast them from behind with its machine guns. Visibility was also a paramount feature for night fighters searching for prey in dark hostile skies. It's not so surprising that the Americans chose a twin-boom design when they hatched the P-61 Black Widow. In 1940, Britain was looking for a night fighter of its own. The Luftwaffe's bombers were tormenting London, sneaking in under the cover of darkness. The RAF needed a high-altitude aircraft that could stand guard over London through the night to repel these invaders. Experiments were already underway, with a new key piece of night fighter technology, AI, or airborne radar. Radar would make a fighter a deadly nocturnal predator, able to pick out enemy aircraft in pitch darkness. A cash-strapped Britain shared the secrets of radar to U.S. manufacturers in the hopes of earning back royalties. Radar was the missing ingredient designer Jack Northrop needed to set loose his own deadly spider. His P-61 Black Widow was in many ways reminiscent of the FW-189. Both had twin booms, twin engines, and a central gondola with an excellent view in all directions. It was America's first aircraft to be installed with radar from the start. Like a spider sensing vibrations in its web, the Black Widow could detect enemy aircraft with the help of the radar unit housed in its rounded, protruding nose. Unlike the FW-189, the Black Widow was designed to be a killer, and its twin-boom design made it a crack shot. Originally, Black Widow carried 4 belly-mounted 20mm forward-firing cannons. Placing the guns in the center line made for more accurate shooting. Some variants also included 4 remote-controlled 50mm machine guns. The Widow could essentially strike approaching enemy aircraft coming from any direction in the upper hemisphere. A byproduct of its gun placement was more room in the wings for fuel storage. This was a critical feature, as the P-61 was designed to loiter for hours at a time. Many innovative features were packed into the Black Widow's fuselage. When asked about the twin-boom arrangement, Gerald H. Balzer, a former Northrop engineer, said, "The configuration of an airplane depends on what you want to cram into it." The P-61 arrived a little late in the war to have a significant impact, but there were other twin-boom fighters in the air causing mayhem for their opponents, including a fork-tailed devil. One of the great strengths of the twin-boom design is the ability to place guns in the nose of a fighter without penalty. In World War I, the riddle of firing through a propeller without blowing it to pieces was solved with the invention of interrupter gears. In World War II, although it would have been theoretically possible to incorporate this same technology in some of the single-prop fighters of the day, there were the problems of additional weight and interrupter gears slowing the rate of fire. Fighters like the Spitfire and Mustang placed their weapons on their wings to avoid this issue altogether. Their guns were angled so the bullets would converge at a set distance in front of the aircraft. This, however, created another problem. A pilot had to wait till an enemy aircraft was a perfect distance away to ensure a good hit. This added a level of complexity to an already frenetic dogfight, which could lead to fatal results in the hands of less skilled pilots. Fighter pilots flying twin-boomed aircraft like the P-38 did not have to worry about conversions.
The reason the P-38 was so awesome in its firepower is because the guns were in the nose. When you fired 450s and 120 and it went straight out. And all the other fighters in World War II, the guns are out in the wings. So the fire goes, and right here is the only place that has maximum impact. The P-38's maximum impact all the way.
The Fokker G1 was World War II's original twin-boom fighter. It first flew in 1937, but it did not see combat until May of 1940. Nicknamed Le Faucheur, or Reaper, it was designed to wreak destruction. This twin-engine heavy fighter had a potent arsenal of weapons to clear enemy aircraft from the skies and gain air superiority. There were two 23mm cannons and up to 8 7.9mm machine guns in the nose. One machine gun was installed in the rear-facing turret to deal with any invaders sneaking up from behind. Dutch aircraft manufacturer Fokker received an order of 26 G1s from an enthusiastic Spanish Republican government, but the aircraft were never delivered. Though the Spanish paid for the Reapers, there was a Dutch embargo on the sale of military aircraft to Spain. Fokker, however, continued building the aircraft and issued a false press release that the fighters were for Finland. The G1s didn't see any combat until the Dutch were literally fighting for their lives. On the 10th of May 1940, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. The Dutch threw everything they had at them, including 36 G1s built for the Dutch Air Force. The end result of the 5-day battle against powerhouse Germany was a foregone conclusion. The G1s that took part in the battle were able to smite back at the Germans, strafing infantry units and attacking transport aircraft, but it was not enough. Construction of the Spanish G1s continued at the Fokker plant, but for a new set of owners. The Spanish order went to the Luftwaffe, who used their brand new G1s as trainers. Perhaps the best known example of a twin-boom fighter in World War II was Lockheed's P-38 Lightning. Though an odd sight at the time, it would prove a formidable fighter and earn the nickname of Fork-tailed Devil from the Germans. In 1937, the U.S. Army Air Corps was looking for a new aircraft and issued a tough set of specifications to the manufacturers of the day. They needed a twin-engine, high-altitude interceptor with a maximum speed of 360 miles per hour and the ability to climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. The aircraft was also required to use Allison's V1710 engines with turbo superchargers and preferably have tricycle landing gear. Legendary Lockheed designer Clarence Kelly Johnson was up for the challenge. He experimented with a number of twin-engine configurations, including placing pusher engines behind the fuselage. In the end, he settled on a twin-boom design, much like the G1 and the FW-189. The lengthy twin booms allowed him to fit Allison's bulky turbo supercharger into a slender aerodynamic housing. With supercharged engines and an aerodynamically efficient airframe, the P-38 became the first American aircraft to break 400 miles per hour. The twin-boom design was unusual for the time and did cause some trepidation for new pilots. There were stories circulating of pilots bailing out and getting decapitated by the props. However, as long as proper bailout procedures were followed, the Lightning was as safe as any other American aircraft in an emergency. Streaking out of the clouds, the Lightning could strike down its opponents with a deadly blow. All of the Lightning's firepower was concentrated in its nose, one 20mm cannon and 4 M2 Browning machine guns, and it had the advantage of pinpoint firing accuracy. The straight-shooting Lightning could consistently hit targets up to 1,000 yards away, sawing aircraft in half in a blaze of bullets. Top-scoring American aces Thomas Maguire and Richard Bong took full advantage of the P-38's precision, racking up 40 and 38 kills respectively against the armorless aircraft of Japan.
Dick Bong was fearless, absolutely fearless. He had one basic rule, and he's told me that on a number of occasions. He said, fly up their tail and blow them away. Don't start shooting a mile away. Run up on their tail, get right on their tail and let them have it. And that's the way he did it.
The P-38 Lightning and the Fokker G1 were not the only examples of twin-boom fighters in World War II. The Swedes, too, had their own homegrown SAAB-21. The SAAB-21 was a twin-boom pusher aircraft, just like the Abrams P-1 Explorer. By incorporating a pusher engine, the designers ensured a clearer field of view ahead, unobstructed by rotating prop blades. However, there were legitimate concerns the pilot could get sucked into the propeller blades during a bailout. Although Saab toyed with the idea of jettisoning the propeller in an emergency, they determined an ejector seat was the best solution to the problem. Versatile twin-boom aircraft wore a number of hats during World War II. They were not just excellent spy planes and fighters, they also made top-notch transports. The Gotha Go 242 was a transport glider built to replace the DFS 230. The 230 was limited, as it could carry 9 troops only in tight quarters, and they had to enter and exit via a small side door. The German Air Ministry, the RLM, was looking for a serious upgrade, something that could carry twice as many troops and equipment. Albert Calkert of Gotha was able to give the RLM everything they wanted when he designed the Go 242. The box-like fuselage of this high-wing monoplane ended in clamshell doors, through which 20 troops or a small vehicle could march or roll in. The high twin-tail booms made this door arrangement possible. The gliders were towed into the air by HE-111s or Ju-52s. By adding rocket pods, the Go 242 could be loaded with even more men or machines. It was a widely used aircraft. Over 1,500 were built. Some were even fitted with radial engines when they were converted into Go 244s. America too experimented with twin-boom transports and created their own flying boxcar. With its twin tails, high wing, and low-hung fuselage, Fairchild C82 packet plane was the same basic shape as the German Go 242 and 244. The C82 was designed to replace conventional transports like the Douglas Dakota. Though a workhorse transport, loading wheeled vehicles like Jeeps into the DC-3 was not the most elegant operation, while the low-hung fuselage of the C82 allowed vehicles to just roll in. Officially named the packet plane, it was aptly nicknamed the flying boxcar, as it had virtually the same capacity as a standard railroad car. The boxcar lost some steam early in its career. The aircraft just didn't have the power to lift heavy cargo. It also arrived late in the war, and only a few were in service by war's end. 223 were built, and some took part in the Berlin airlift. Though the C-82 was something of a disappointment for Fairchild, their packet plane would have a second life. The C-82 was modified into the much more capable C119. The C-82's high cockpit was moved to the nose of the plane to create more room for cargo. As well, the airframe was strengthened, and more powerful engines were installed to increase the carrying capacity. Maximum takeoff weight ballooned from 54,000 to 74,000 pounds, and troop carrying capacity increased from 42 to 62. The C-82 had been nicknamed the boxcar, but now with the beefier C-119, it was official. During the Korean conflict, the C-119 made a name for itself as a bridge builder. In late 1959, the Chinese PLA destroyed a key bridge between Koto-ri and Hungnam. 8 U.S. Air Force C-119s carried an entire bridge, piece by piece, to restore the escape route between the two cities. Each of the 8 bridge sections were 2,900 pounds and 16 feet long. In the 1950s, other aircraft manufacturers looked to capitalize on the same basic twin-boom design of the boxcar. In France, Nord Aviation produced the Nord Atlas, and in England, Armstrong Whitworth developed the AW660 Argosy. This was a 4-engine turboprop with the cargo space of a typical flatbed truck. Its pod and twin-boom structure earned it the nickname the Whistling Wheelbarrow. In both cases, each aircraft had large doors at the rear to accommodate bulky pieces of cargo. While Nord Atlas and Armstrong Whitworth were interested in these conventional transports, back at Fairchild there was an attempt to create an even better mousetrap. Their XC120 packplane streamlined the whole transport process. Traditionally, cargo was unloaded from truck and reloaded onto aircraft box by box or crate by crate. But what if there was a universal container that could detach from a truck and reattach onto a flying vehicle, substantially shortening loading time? This was the premise behind the XC120 packplane. Fairchild took the fuselage of a C119B and sliced it below the flight deck. They wanted to fit a rolling detachable pod underneath, so they raised the fuselage a few feet higher by angling the wings upward. It wasn't possible to have a traditional nose wheel, so 2 mini landing gear sets were added forward of the main gear. The landing gear was adjustable, so pod loading could be expedited. In addition to carrying cargo, the packplane might carry a specialized mobile hospital pod, mobile buildings, or pods to transport paratroopers. It seemed an ingenious idea, but the U.S. military failed to show any real interest, and instead purchased more traditional transports. The whole idea behind the packplane was crated up and discarded. The 1950s saw the gradual decline and retirement of many of the dependable prop-powered warriors of World War II. The new generation of fighters was jet-powered. Though there were several successful jet fighters in World War II, it took time for this technology to mature. When British manufacturer de Havilland conjured up the Vampire, they chose a twin-boom design to mitigate some of the weaknesses of early jet engines. The Vampire was built around a single Halford H1 engine, nicknamed the Goblin. The engine had only 2,300 pounds of thrust, and de Havilland engineers did all that they could to make full use of the power available. The Vampire was an extremely lightweight plane, made of molded plywood and metal, and it had 2 slender tail booms. Designers chose a twin-boom design to keep the jet pipe as short as possible. If they had used a conventional single tail, the exhaust would have had to travel a few feet farther, leading to a loss of power. The Vampire didn't have the greatest range to begin with, but when fitted with the next generations of Goblin engines, it became a record setter. The aircraft was in fact the first jet to cross the Atlantic when, on the 14th of July 1948, 6 RAF Vampires of No. 54 Squadron RAF traveled from Stornoway, Scotland to Goose Bay, Canada, with stops in Iceland and Greenland. Buyers weren't scared away from buying the Vampire and Ghost combination. Over 3,000 were sold in various configurations to over 30 air forces worldwide. The designers at SAAB decided to add some Goblin power of their own to one of their reliable prop designs. Rather than build a new jet fighter from scratch, they chose to retrofit their pusher Saab 21 with a Goblin 2 engine. Back at de Havilland, designers continued to improve on the success of the Vampire design. In 1949, de Havilland unveiled the Venom. Although there were some modifications, this was essentially a Vampire with a new engine, almost twice as powerful, the de Havilland Ghost. In 1951, de Havilland made a much more radical change to the Vampire's original design. They created a twin-boom, twin-engine aircraft with swept wings for the Fleet Air Arm. It was known as the Sea Vixen. The Vixen had a major upgrade in engine power. It used two Rolls-Royce Avon engines with 7,500 pounds of thrust each, enough power for it to reach sound-breaking speeds in a shallow dive. The Sea Vixen had a unique two-seat arrangement.
The pilot's point of view may be that it was all right as an airplane, but what did the observer think? He was in a coal hole on the right of the pilot, and he was completely enclosed in there. And he hadn't much idea of what was going on outside. I would think it was a most unpleasant experience to be an observer on a Sea Vixen.
The Vampire and Venom had both been adapted for carrier use, but the Vixen was a purpose-built carrier-based fleet defense fighter. The aircraft could carry a complement of missiles, rockets, or bombs, including nuclear weapons. In some models, additional fuel tanks could be stored in enlarged tail booms, which jutted out of the top of the wings. The Sea Vixen proved a capable fleet defense fighter, which served the Royal Navy until the 1970s. However, it did have an unusually high accident rate.
Night landing, deck landing is never easier. But a big airplane like this, it had the sad fault that the ailerons became very ineffective at the low speeds at which deck landing are carried out. And this caused problems with lining up the aircraft with the center line of the carrier at night.
Twin-boom aircraft were built with a multitude of engine arrangements throughout aviation history. There were twin jets like the Sea Vixen, single jets, twin prop planes, and pusher planes, just to name a few. But in the 1960s, an aircraft appeared which tried something different. The Cessna Skymaster had a push-pull configuration. There was a prop in the aircraft's nose and another in the rear of the fuselage. Cessna chose this design as safety was the main selling point of the aircraft. It was an interim replacement for the O-1 Bird Dog. With a single-engine aircraft like the Bird Dog, there was always the danger that the one engine might fail in mid-flight. The Skymaster's second engine was a fail-safe. As well, with twin-engine aircraft in a side-by-side arrangement, there is the issue of yaw should one engine fail in flight or during takeoff. The centerline thrust of the push-pull configuration ensured that the Skymaster would not veer out of control in these situations. It was a successful aircraft with almost 3,000 produced for military and civilian use. When the U.S. became entangled in the Vietnam War in the 1960s, the O-2, the militarized version of the Skymaster, served as a forward air controller and light observation aircraft, marking targets for heavier fighters and bombers. The O-2 second engine was invaluable should one give out over hostile territory. However, the O-2 wasn't particularly fast with both engines turning. With one damaged, it was a sitting duck. The Skymaster would be succeeded by another twin-boom aircraft especially built for the rough-and-tumble action of Vietnam, the OV10 Bronco. When W.H. Beckett and Colonel K.P. Rice of the U.S. Marine Corps conceived the Bronco, they wanted to create a close air support aircraft that could operate from jungle roads. Twin booms were vital to the concept. They were impressed by the shooting accuracy of twin-boom fighters like the P-38, and wanted to include a 106mm recoilless rifle along the center line. The tailplane had to be high up on the tail booms just to avoid the backblast. The enthusiastic duo built the fiberglass prototype in Rice's garage, but they had a hard time convincing the U.S. Armed Forces of the benefits of the Bronco. But with things heating up in Vietnam, a specification for a light armed reconnaissance aircraft, LARA, was given the green light by the Navy, Marines, and Air Force. They were looking for a light attack and observation plane to replace the O-1 and O-2, and the Bronco fit the bill. The production version of the Bronco was not quite what Beckett and Rice had envisioned. The Bronco had become a heavyweight warhorse. Over 2,000 pounds of extra electronics, an ejection seat, and a more rugged landing gear meant operation from dirt roads was out of the question. It also lost the recoilless rifle that Beckett and Rice had longed for. The new design wasn't left defenseless, however. It could carry up to 3 tons of external munitions and 4 M60C machine guns. With these alterations, the Bronco still became one of the top-notch counterinsurgency aircraft and remained so for the next 30 years. In Vietnam, the Bronco had a twin-boom stablemate which proved you can teach an old dog new tricks. The C119 boxcar, which had made a name for itself in Korea building bridges, was tasked with a deadly new mission. In Vietnam, the flying boxcars were transformed into flying gunships. They had a major upgrade in firepower and other equipment to complete the transformation. The AC-119G Shadow was readied for battle with armor plate, 4 Gatling miniguns, infrared sensors, and flare launchers, while the AC-119K Stinger was upgraded with 2 GE M61 Vulcan 20mm cannons and 2 underwing turbojets adding 6,000 pounds of thrust. In 1986, a twin-boom design attempted a first in aviation, a non-stop trip around the world without refueling. Burt Rutan's Model 76 was extremely lightweight. The airframe weighed only 939 pounds. As there would be no pit stops along the way, every pound counted. The twin booms were essentially huge fuel reservoirs. There were additional tanks in the wings, fuselage, and the canards, and it took 7,000 pounds of fuel to fill them all up. The aircraft had 2 engines, one in the front and one in the rear. The front engine was fired up during takeoff and the early stages of the flight, when the Voyager was heavy with fuel, but it was switched off for the remainder of the voyage. On December 14, 1986, Dick Rutan and Gina Yeager set off from Edwards Air Force Base for a trip around the world. The Voyager had a bumpy start that morning. The wings, sagging with fuel, scraped against the runway during takeoff, but the damage was minimal. Though they had to circumnavigate some hostile weather and had a faulty fuel pump to contend with, the trip went largely as planned. Perhaps the cramped conditions and the stress of the situation were the greatest obstacles of all. After 9 days, 3 minutes, and 44 seconds, on December 23, 1986, the exhausted duo returned to where they had started. The Voyager and her crew were victorious. Their triumph was shared with thousands of cheering spectators and the press who beamed the Voyager's round-the-world trip around the globe. When twin-boom aircraft first appeared, they were an odd bird, but their eccentric designs proved to be a stroke of genius. Designers faced with tough specifications often turned to boomers for the answer. Whether mapping the globe, circling the globe, or leading the charge into battle, time after time, twin-boom aircraft demonstrated their worth. Where twin booms will next take us, we can only guess. The sky is no longer the limit.
Dark and menacing, Northrop's P61 Black Widow was a night stalker of the worst kind. Large, powerful, and fast, the P61 was the first American combat aircraft to be designed from the ground up as a night fighter. As large as a medium bomber, the P61 was optimized for nocturnal air-to-air combat. Considered to be one of the ugliest fighters to see service, the Black Widow was in fact a killer. Beneath its slick black coat, the P61 proved extremely efficient, invisibly approaching German and Japanese aircraft and blasting them from the sky. The birth of the P61 can be traced back to 1940. During the unrelenting Blitz, German bombers roamed at will over Britain. Britain's night fighter force proved ineffective, but during the Blitz, a small number of fighters were equipped with the new and top-secret airborne interception radar. Desperate for an effective night fighter, the British showed the Americans their new radar in the hopes they could build a new fighter to carry it. British requirements were tough. The new fighter had to be fast, heavily armed, with a loiter time of 8 hours over the target area. Northrop rose to the challenge. Initial design work would begin in 1940, but it wasn't until late 1944 that the Black Widow entered service. Plagued by constant design changes, the P-61 prototype did not take to the air until May 1942. By June 1944, the P-61 was finally ready for combat. On July 6, the P-61 recorded its first victory with the destruction of a Japanese Betty bomber. In Europe, P-61s would gain glory by running up an impressive score against Germany's nasty V-1 flying bog. 9 V-1 kills would be credited to P-61 crews. By the time the P-61s entered combat, targets were scarce in both Europe and the Pacific. In Europe, however, Black Widow intruder missions proved extremely effective. Night after night, P-61s would fly deep into Germany, destroying anything that moved. Large numbers of locomotives, supply convoys, and the odd bridge were destroyed. P-61 crews were also credited with a number of Luftwaffe fighters, both in the air and on the ground. In the end, only 2 squadrons would serve in Europe. The 422nd would be credited with 43 enemy aircraft destroyed, with the 425th chipping in another 10. The P-61, for all its promise and performance, was finally phased out by the United States Army Air Force service in 1950 and replaced by the F-82 twin Mustang. But the P-61 would fly again, not with guns, but with eyes of a spider. Responding to the Air Force's need for a long-range photo-reconnaissance aircraft, Howard Hughes designed and built the XF-11. Unfortunately, on July 7, 1946, the XF-11 flown by Hughes crashed into a Los Angeles neighborhood. Continuing problems with the XF-11 caused the United States Air Force to cancel the project and turn to Northrop. The result was an order for 320 F-15 reporters. The F-15 was created using the XP-61E, the last fighter variant of the famed Black Widow. After just 6 months of flying time, the XP-61 was returned to Northrop for extensive modification. With guns removed, a new nose was fitted, equipped with a number of aerial cameras. Designated as the XF-15, this new aircraft flew for the first time on July 3, 1945. Using existing P-61 wings, engines, and tail sections, the new F-15 reporter had a more streamlined fuselage that housed a crew of 2 under a continuous bubble canopy. The revised center section had the pilot and camera operator sitting in tandem. The rear seat was equipped with rudimentary flying controls, which made it possible for the camera operator to aid the pilot on long missions. The aircraft's 6 cameras were placed in the elongated nose, replacing the 4 20mm cannon. Powered by 2 turbo-supercharged R2800-73 engines, the F-15 had a sparkling top speed of 440 miles per hour at 33,000 feet. In terms of performance, the F-15 possessed similar flight characteristics to the troublesome XF-11. This in spite of being powered by less powerful engines. The F-15 was accepted in September 1946, but by 1947 the United States Army Air Force cancelled the contract, leaving just 36 examples being accepted into service. During its operational lifetime, the F-15 Reporter did what it was supposed to do. Responsible for most of the aerial maps of North Korea, its contribution proved extremely valuable during the coming Korean War. The combat career of the P-61 Black Widow was an extremely short one. Measured in just months, it was the shortest of all the American fighters to appear in World War II. As America's first purpose-built night fighter, the Widow proved extremely effective. Unfortunately, its late arrival meant a combat record of unimpressive numbers. In fact, of the 35,000 fighter pilots trained by the United States, just 485 were trained as night fighters. While the F-15 Reporter would have a longer career, it was not a distinguished one. With just 36 built, the F-15 would suffer from poor serviceability rates due to a lack of spare parts.
As Britain and the Allies struggled for survival in a fierce battle with the Nazis, American industrial might was mobilized to supply them with the weapons and machines to beat back the German onslaught. Millionaire Howard Hughes was anxious to participate in the war effort to do his part to defeat Hitler. His intentions were not completely altruistic. A military contract would also have been extremely profitable. Hughes built the prototype D-2, a speedy wooden fighter/bomber, entirely with his own money and in secret. He hoped to amaze the U.S. Army Air Force with it, but the plane was flatly rejected. Fortunately for Hughes, he had friends in high places. When President Roosevelt declared war on December 8, 1941, he had not only to consider the fate of the free world and the lives of millions of American soldiers, he also had to weigh the risks to his own sons. Elliott Roosevelt was a member of the U.S. Army Air Force. He had received his captain's commission on his 30th birthday in 1940. At the time, Roosevelt was battling for a third term in office, and there were cries of nepotism. But General Henry Hap Arnold, chief of the Air Corps, silenced those rumors. Elliott Roosevelt's poor eyesight left him classified as 4F, or unfit to fly, but he still managed to carve out a respectable career, participating in 89 combat missions. Reconnaissance was his specialty, and he was considered the leading expert in recon in the European theater, and a pioneer in aerial night photography. While commanding the 3rd Reconnaissance Group in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, Roosevelt had a chance to fly on board a speedy de Havilland Mosquito. He was so impressed with de Havilland's wooden wonder, he became a passionate advocate of British aircraft and believed American-made B-17s and P-38s were sitting ducks against the German defenses. His enthusiasm may have blinded him when a sly Howard Hughes presented him with a prototype for his own wooden aircraft, the D-2. The D-2 was a twin-boom fighter just like the Vultee Spruce Goose, designed by Hughes' former employee Richard Palmer. Palmer left Hughes for Vultee because he was tired of the company's lack of focus. The D-2 also had a remarkable resemblance to the P-38 Lightning. They were so similar, Hughes did not believe it was a coincidence, and he testified to the Senate that Lockheed had stolen his design. Though the D-2 had been rejected by the U.S. Army Air Force, when Colonel Elliott Roosevelt came to town looking for a new reconnaissance plane, Hughes dazzled him Hollywood-style to salvage a contract. The P-38 Lightning had been the workhorse reconnaissance plane for the U.S. Army Air Force, but by 1943, they were looking for an upgrade. Colonel Roosevelt, an expert in recon, was asked to explore what aircraft were in the works that might take over for the P-38. Hughes spared no expense when Roosevelt came to see his plant in Culver City, California. A line of limousines greeted the president's son and his staff at the airport, and they were taken on the trip of their lives. Women and starlets were thrown at them. They were treated to Hollywood's most extravagant parties in the hottest nightclubs. a married Roosevelt was introduced to his next wife, Faye Emerson, an up-and-coming actress with whom he would have a scandalous affair. In the midst of all this partying, there was time to see the D-2. Its Duramold body, a type of plywood bonded with plastic and molded under heat and pressure, would certainly have impressed Roosevelt, who was enamored with a Mosquito. By the time Colonel Roosevelt left California, he was sold on the D-2. He became an enthusiastic salesman for Hughes when he briefed General Arnold and his father on the project. Arnold was in a difficult position, as Material Command had already rejected the aircraft. They did not believe Hughes had the facilities or track record to deliver on an order. In the end, Arnold had no choice but to listen to the president's son. He ordered the XF-11, an all-metal and larger reconnaissance version of the D-2. The decision caused an uproar in the Army Air Force, not only because the D-2 had been rejected, but also because they already had a similar plane in development, the Lockheed Chain Lightning. The XP-58 was a long-range heavy fighter which could outperform the D-2, and it came from a known and reliable aircraft and manufacturer, the P-38 Lightning, built by Lockheed. Uproar or not, Elliott had his father's ear. Hughes won a $43 million contract to build 100 XF-11s, a contract that would be worth $500 million today. Unfortunately for the Army Air Force, their worst fears about Hughes came to be. Work progressed slowly on the XF-11. Each of its Pratt & Whitney 28-cylinder radial engines drove a pair of contra-rotating four-bladed controllable pitch propellers. It was hoped this style of prop would increase performance and stability, but the whole system was too complex and ultimately scrapped. As years passed, the XF-11 project, forced on the U.S. Army Air Force, became increasingly unpopular. The original D-2 prototype was mysteriously destroyed in a fire in November of 1944. At the time, Hughes and the U.S. Army Air Force were fighting over who should pay for the original development costs. With the prototype a pile of ash, the two sides agreed to split the costs. It was an accident which was highly convenient for the millionaire. Like the XF-11, controversy followed Colonel Roosevelt as the war progressed. Project Aphrodite was a joint mission between the U.S. Navy and U.S. Army Air Force to destroy heavily fortified German submarine pens and V-2 sites with bomber drones. The pilot and co-pilot would take aircraft heavily loaded with explosives to altitude before parachuting to safety. A mothership remotely controlled the bombers the rest of the way via radio. In later years, Elliott Roosevelt claimed to be in the Mosquito chase plane that recorded the tragic death of Lieutenant Joe Kennedy Jr., brother of future President John F. Kennedy. His plane inexplicably detonated before it reached its target. Elliott asserted that he actually flew through the deadly fireball that ensued, but there is no record of the president's son participating in the mission. There was also some controversy when Roosevelt was finally awarded his wings. General Arnold, who had been forced to accept Hughes' XF-11, also had his arm twisted to intervene in Colonel Roosevelt's final promotion. In January of 1945, Arnold ordered General Carl Spaatz to appoint Elliott, whose poor vision had left him classified as 4F, or unfit to fly, as a rated pilot. The president then submitted his son's name to the Senate for promotion to brigadier general. On April 12, 1945, America mourned the death of President Roosevelt. He had accomplished much during his tenure, guiding them out of the Depression and through the war. As tragic as his passing was, it did untie the hands of General Arnold. He was finally able to put millionaire Howard Hughes in his place. The XF-11 order was canceled a month after the president's death on May 11, 1945, though Hughes was allowed to continue to work on the prototypes. By the time the war ended, Hughes still had little to show for all the money spent on the XF-11. It would be another year before a prototype would fly, and the first flight ended in a crash that nearly killed him. The XF-11 was not Hughes's only multi-million-dollar scandal. His behemoth transport, the H-4 Spruce Goose, was more of a lame duck and was yet to fly. With millions of dollars poured into both projects, questions swirled in the Senate about what Hughes was doing with the money. In 1947, the Brewster Committee looked into the spending irregularities surrounding these projects.
I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it. And I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
Elliott Roosevelt and Johnny Myers were also called as witnesses. Myers, a publicist who worked for Hughes, gave a detailed expense report of all the perks Roosevelt had received during his time in California.
Well, now, can you tell me why you were charging up to aircraft production $132 for a nylon hose for Miss Emerson?
Because she'd been very charming. Just like the presidents up higher. The girls were very pleasant.
What has that got to do with aircraft production?
They just went along. Every company in the business did it. We're no different.
Well, but is it, you say because she was very charming, that's the reason that you charged up $132.
That's right.
For the which would go into the production of airplanes.
That's right.
And now, will you tell us why you gave her $20 and charged it up to the company to go home if she was very charming?
Well, you taught me.
Myers had even paid for Roosevelt's wedding to Faye Emerson. In his defense, Roosevelt claimed that he first heard about the XF-11 after the Culver City visit in a briefing from Arnold.
And there are efforts to find out whether there was any connection that I might have had with the chief executive, which might have had an effect on any war contracts. And I'm here to give you the complete facts. It is undoubtedly true that he bought some tickets to, from New York to Washington. But I still want you to put the question to him, was he completely positive that one of those tickets was for Elliott Roosevelt?
Well, I'll put it right to him now. Mr. Myers, what do you say? Look at that sheet. You told us about them being lost and buying the fares back. Now, what do you say about it?
Just what it says here. It says Colonel Elliott Roosevelt Party.
Yeah.
So I didn't testify that he was one of them. He could have been one of the other fellows. Did I say that under the word Elliott Roosevelt Party? What?
During a break in hearings, Hughes decided to give the Senate all the evidence they needed that the Spruce Goose was fit to fly. While taxi testing the aircraft, he took the H-4 on its first and only flight. In daredevil fashion, Hughes proved to the cameras and reporters that the millions of American tax dollars had not been squandered or misappropriated. The millionaire used his Hollywood dazzle to save his own skin.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
The only reason for an airplane to exist is to go fast. At the Great Air Meet in Rheims, Glenn Curtis set a world's record of just over 43 miles an hour, and the quest for speed was on. In 1913, Maurice Prévost was flying a streamlined Dépôt-Dassin monoplane at 126 miles an hour, and Europe claimed the lead in aviation speed. Immediately after World War I, quest for speed became a catalyst for the development of fighter planes. Countries which had not invested in new engines for their wartime fighters would, for reasons of national pride, invest in new engines to race them peacetime. Then, in America in the 1930s, the situation reversed itself. Civilian aircraft, like the Travel Air Mystery Ship and the GB, Waddell Williams racers, became even faster than military aircraft. The reason was simple. Same engines were available to both civil racers and military fighters. The fighters had to carry guns, bombs, oxygen, and radios, while the racers were built only for speed. The world's absolute speed record was passed from country to country. And as the racers became faster and more powerful, they also became more expensive. America's Howard Hughes could afford to build his own racer, and with it set a land-plane speed record. But the absolute speed record of 440 miles an hour was set by a Macchi MC-72 seaplane in 1934, financed by the Italian government. Then military aircraft came back into the lead as the Heinkel and Messerschmitt firms competed for the title. Messerschmitt Bf-109R set a speed record of 469 miles an hour in 1939, a record that lasted for many years. When the jet aircraft came out, speed records rapidly accelerated, the British breaking 1,000 miles an hour in 1956 in a Fairey Delta II. Speeds continued to climb, finally reaching 2,193 miles an hour in 1976 by the Lockheed SR-71, alias Blackbird. While speed was the object, there were many other benefits in creating ever faster aircraft. Improvement in fuels, streamlining, lubricants, materials, and the list goes on. Speed produced not only prestige and pleasure, but also utility. The speed record setters ultimately paved the way for commercial transports, business jets, and private planes.